So it is time for the tier list for the level 1 spells, and this is all the level 1 spells. I've got 53 here to go through, so don't expect this to be a quick video. As with my previous tier list, this is based on my own experience. This is not supposed to be taken objectively, so if you do have a different idea, please do let me know and explain why. And I can see from the comments on my previous video, do you know what? I put Rare Frost A tier, should have been S tier. Completely agree with you guys. So do let me know, try and be kind about it. Things I will be trying to take into account are the fact that now each of these spells costs a level 1 spell slot. They are the most common and the most numerous spell slots we will have, but still, if we're using a level 1 spell slot, it means we have one less spell to cast in the day. And for most classes, there is an opportunity cost. If a bard picks Animal Friendship, for example, it means they're not picking another spell at level 1. A lot of these spells are used in combat. Some of them have use outside of combat. I will try to keep that into account. And I'm going to go through these in alphabetical order, starting with Animal Friendship, which can be learnt by bards, druids, nature domain clerics, and rangers at level 2. There is also a necklace that can be found from the goblin camp. So what does Animal Friendship do? If the animal fails a wisdom saving throw, they won't attack you for 10 turns or until they are hurt by you or one of your party members, which makes it basically useless within combat, because as soon as you hurt it, it's going to be hostile again. But outside of combat, it can help you with charisma checks against, or maybe against is probably the wrong word, but charisma checks with animals. Let's try intimidation. So here I can use Animal Friendship. In higher difficulty modes, the target might become hostile when the spell ends. That means Tactician. But I also want to point out that I can use Friends here instead. Why would I use a spell slot if I can use a cantrip? I don't know. So in fact, I've just used Friends there. I basically see no need for this spell. During combat, you're using an action to make a single enemy, more enemies at higher levels, not actually attack you, the caster, but it doesn't affect your whole party, and they might pass the saving throw anyway, and as soon as somebody hurts them, they're going to start attacking you. And outside of combat, I can use other spells like a cantrip rather than this, so for me it's a complete critical miss. Armor of Agathis is next, and it's available to warlocks, draconic bloodline sorcerers if they pick the white ancestry, and then bards can get it from their magical secrets. What does it do? At level 1, I'm using a level 5 warlock spell slot here, but at level 1 it gives you 5 temporary hit points and you deal 5 cold damage when you're hit by an attack. And you can cast this outside of combat. It's not concentration. It doesn't have a turn limit. It's until long rest. And so if we get into combat, so I'll try and get attacks of opportunity against me. Oh, of course. He's just too good. Alright, let's try 2 attacks of opportunity, shall we? I'd hope one of these hits. There we are. So the enemy did 15 damage, and they took 25. I've still got these 10 temporary hit points left, and the next time I'm hit, the enemy will take another 25 cold damage. This is a very decent spell. I'm going to stick it in A. It combines very well with Blade Ward, and if you make your enemies wet, it works well with Abjuration Wizards also. And like I showed in my Abjuration Wizard video, you can take this at level 1 for a Warlock, and then if you multiclass into, it doesn't have to be Wizard, but multiclass into another spellcasting class, you can use your other spell slots to cast this. So you can cast this at level 6. The reason I don't want to put this in critical hit is because it's only available to a very limited number of classes, and it does require you to get into danger, it does require you to be hurt, but I do like it nevertheless. Next up is Arms of Hadar. At level 1 it does 2d6 necrotic damage to all enemies within a 10-foot radius, and this is only available to Warlocks, nobody else. Of course you can take the Magic Initiate feat for any of these classes I mentioned. So it's got a decent range. It will harm your allies though if they're within that range. If they fail their saving throw, they cannot take reactions. These enemies have already used their reaction mind. So 2 of them passed their saving throws, 1 of them failed. It's on 66, it did 21 divided by 2. Because they passed their saving throw, 10 and 11 damage. 26 and 66 is pretty decent, but I don't think it's that great. The range is... the range is half decent. The range is okay, but the damage just isn't good enough. I know this was a Warlock using a level 5 spell slot, but imagine this had been at level 1. It wouldn't have been very good. It affects your allies as well, which I don't particularly want to happen. I'd much rather take other spells on my Warlock, and Will's okay here. His armor class is 21. It's not the highest, but it's pretty decent. At lower levels, your Warlocks won't normally have a decent armor class, a high armor class, unless of course they've got the appropriate feat or proficiency from their race. To use it effectively, you have to be a melee Warlock. Sorry Fig, your attacking is getting a bit annoying. Bane is next, available to Bards, Clerics, Oath of Vengeance Paladins, and Warlocks can get it from an Eldritch Invocation, Thief of Five Fates, but they can only cast it once per long rest. What does it do? Well, it forces the enemies to make a Charisma saving throw, which generally is quite rare. Charisma saving throws of enemies aren't necessarily particularly high. If they fail, they have a minus 1d4 penalty to attack rolls and saving throws for 10 turns. Just about see 3 of them here. Alright, one of them managed to fail that. So now, yeah, they've got a minus 1d4 penalty. So if I try and do something that has a saving throw, let's be a bit over the top here. Much more likely to fail. It does require concentration though. I'm struggling between B and C because I'm really going to compare it to Bless next. This just means it's next anyway. It only affects a few enemies at a time, and once they're dead, the effect is used up, and it requires concentration, and it's going to fight with concentration with many other spells in the game. And I'm going to move to Bless. Instead of giving a penalty, Bless is a buff. So what does Bless do? Bless up to 3 creatures, they gain a 1d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws. I much prefer to cast this over Bane. And Bless is available to Clerics, Paladins, and Bards via the Magical Secrets. There is a staff that has a slightly better version of Bless. And the reason for this is, as long as I'm concentrating on it, I get this bonus. And this affects all of my attack rolls and saving throws. Whereas once the enemy's dead, like that Bane is gone and it's useless. And I'm assuming my characters aren't going to go down most of the time. And so now I've got a very high chance to hit with anything that requires an attack roll. Doesn't even matter what I'm using. Even my Dark Urge here, who's taken 1 level and everything, has a very good chance to hit.
What do I have to lose?
Where's Bless going to go? I'm going to stick it in S tier because throughout the whole game, this is useful. From level 1, potentially even all the way up to level 12. By the time we get to level 12, I suppose a lot of our items are actually very good, so maybe we don't need Bless towards the end. But it still helps with your saving throws, and it's always a good choice to cast Bless. It's never a bad choice. Burning Hands is next, which is available to Sorcerers, Wizards, Fiend Warlocks, Light Domain Clerics, Arcane Tricksters, Eldritch Knights, and Mephistopheles Tieflings, and Draconic Bloodline Sorcerers of the Red Ancestors. Quite a lot. Very well known spell. So what does it do? It's a level 1 spell. Evocation. I'm not going to take into account the different wizard subclasses, because it will be different for each of the subclasses. For example, this will be much more useful on an Evocation Wizard compared to all the other wizard types. It does an AoE, a 17-foot cone, does 3d6 fire damage if the enemies fail a dexterity saving throw. Here it is. Obviously this isn't where you would normally use it. So we can see it did very little damage here. I'm in Baldur's Gate. I'm in Act 3. It did very little damage, and it will harm my allies. You can see that they light up. If you upcast it, you do an extra 1d6 damage per level higher than level 1, but I really don't think it's worth it. That's why I get counterspelled. Yeah. And this shows that the level 1 spells that deal damage early in the game, you know what, maybe this is even an A, you do have to get close if you're using it, and some of these spell casters that use it are a bit squishy. So maybe at level 1, level 2, perhaps level 3 it's kind of an A, and as you go up the levels it just gets worse and worse and worse, and by the end of the game it's basically pointless. You've got so many other things that you can do. Overall, I'm going to leave it at C because it does have its use. It's fire damage. That can set things alight if you really need to. But even at level 5, your cantrips start to do comparable damage. Obviously, it's not they're not AoEs. Level 10 especially, if you've got Acid Splash, it does 3d6 damage at level 10, which is just the same as this. Why would you use a level 1 spell slot when you could use Acid Splash? Useful early in the game, basically pointless towards the end of the game. Charm Person is next. So you can charm a humanoid to prevent it from attacking you. You get an advantage on a charisma checks against it. Enemies have advantage on saving throws against being charmed. And if you or an ally hurts them, this ends. And on tactician mode, if you use this during a dialogue, you'll be accused of enchanting them. So in combat, look at that 30% chance. Part of this is because this spellcaster's got a very bad casting stat. But they've got advantage on this. Let's try and use it on the highest possible. 2%, look at that. 30%, I don't know. It hasn't worked. And even if it had worked, all the other enemies can still attack the absurd urge here. And like I showed with animal friendship, if you're in dialogue, just pick friends instead. It has the same effect. You're still going to be accused either way in tactician mode. As a consequence, it's just a complete critical miss. There's no point. Even if I'd used Charm Person on this character, I then have to ignore them if I want to have the effect from Charm Person. It's just a waste of a spell slot. It's a waste of a spell remembered or spell known. I'd much rather use friends. Oh, and I forgot to say that Charm Person can be learnt by bards, druids, sorcerers, warlocks, wizards, trickery domain clerics, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, and there is a necklace that grants you this. Shard's Temptation. Just avoid it. It's just one of the worst spells we can have in the game. Chromatic Orb is next, which is available to sorcerers, wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights. Bards can learn it through magical secrets, and warlocks can get an invocation, the Book of Ancient Secrets, but they can only use it once per long rest, but it doesn't require a spell slot. What does it do? That doesn't actually tell us. What does it do? You get to choose a different variant, one based on a different kind of element. So we've got acids, cold, fire, lightning, poison, and thunder. The first 5 here do 2d8 damage of their respective type, but also creates a surface. And thunder does 3d8 thunder damage, but doesn't create any sort of surface. So it's nice that we've got these different variants. One of them does a bit more damage, and they all create a surface. So let's throw this one over here. So it did 8 damage on 2d8. It's perfectly fine, perfectly reasonable. Kind of more importantly, it creates a surface. At lower levels, this is probably A. At higher levels, it's not quite as bad as Burning Hands. We do get some extra use out of it because we can create these surfaces. An acid surface reduces armor class by 2 while the enemy is... Oops, I didn't mean to run through that. While anyone is standing in it. Even Halson if he wants to stand in it. There we are. And because we've got this versatility, I would say it's just about worthy of B tier. Basically, it stays useful for a bit longer than something like Burning Hands. But 3d8 damage, again, at level 10, my cantrips do that. At 2d8 with the other variants apart from Thunder, my cantrips do that at level 5 even. But we do get these surfaces. Color Spray is next, available to bards, sorcerers, wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, and there is a ring of color spray found in the Harpy's Nest, which used to be once per battle but now is once per short rest, sadly. So what does it do? I've got a scroll of it here. Blind creatures up to a combined 33 hit points. So the 33 hit points, very useful lower down in the levels, slightly less useful higher in these levels. I've got one enemy who's at less than 33 hit points currently. So let's go and use it. It has to be short range. Alright, you've only got a 17, I think it's 17 feet range. So they got color spray, they're blinded. Awesome, except it's only for 1 turn. Now thankfully I've chosen quite a good person to do it on. So if I try to get an attack against, yeah, whatever, we'll take these attacks. I'll have advantage against him, which is cool, which here is going to be fine. It means I will probably kill him. There we are. And that's nice, that works. I've got Carl the Weak, which is why he died. But when it lasts only 1 turn, if he had survived, it would go away on his turn. So I have to make sure that I cast it with the right person. And for example, Will could not have benefited from that. It doesn't require a saving throw, it just works with enemies who are on 33 hit points or less. At lower levels, I'd probably put this at about a B, because the fact it only lasts 1 turn is very frustrating. Almost all other debuffs last longer. At these later levels, it uses an action just to make 1, maybe 2 enemies blind. Sure, blind is a strong condition, but when it's their turn and they lose that condition, they still attack normally. If you're blind, you normally have disadvantage on your attacks, but at the start of their turn, they lose the condition. So you don't even get that debuff, all you get is advantage against them. Also, I will say, if enemies are blind, they cannot and do not take opportunity attacks against you. I can maybe see this being at C, but for me, later, even mid-game, I'm going to be using my action to do something better. Either a better debuff, or just getting rid of an enemy altogether. If it lasted 2 turns, I would definitely put it higher, because it's a very good debuff, and it doesn't require a saving throw. But from about level 5, maybe 6 onwards, I've never used it. Sure, if it's on the ring, it's fine because you don't have to use a spell slot and you don't have to use a spell prepared or spell known for it. But I think at the end of the day, it's not really that useful. Command. Command is available to clerics, fiend warlocks, paladins, and bards can learn it through magical secrets. So when you click on command, you get 5 variants. Approach, which makes enemies approach you. Drop, which makes them drop their weapon if they've got one, and on its turn do nothing else. Flee makes them run away. Grovel makes everyone prone, and halt just makes them do nothing, no actions, no moving whatsoever. And for every level above level 1, you get to affect an extra creature. So on Fiend Warlocks, I think this is particularly powerful. So what I'm going to try and do is going to use drop. You have to use the same variant for all 5 creatures. 4, 5. That's it, they've dropped their weapons and we can now pick them up. And any enemy who is a martial class, anyone who's using the weapon to attack, this is absolutely debilitating. Because they're just going to hit you with their fists. They might try and use items, they might try and shove you, but their main source of damage is now gone. And combined with picking up their items, it's just so powerful. Even at level 1, it's really good. There's no concentration needed. And we've got all those variants. I've only shown you one. This goes straight up to S tier. Even from the Nautiloid, you can get Commander Zulk to drop his sword, so you don't even have to bother killing him. It's usable all the way through the game. Obviously here I used a high level spell slot, but even at level 1, just targeting a single enemy, it can really make a massive difference. You can make someone prone to give your allies advantage in melee, you can make them run away, so you can get loads of opportunity attacks against them, and they don't do anything on their turn. It's such a good control spell. Compelled Duel is next. It's only available to paladins. If the enemy fails a wisdom saving throw, then they will have disadvantage if they attack other allies apart from the caster. It does require concentration. One nice thing, I suppose, is it requires a bonus action rather than an action. So if I cast this on, let's have someone who might actually have a chance to fail. Well, let's try it on Fist Larch. There we are, that's worked quite nicely. So on their turn, if they attack anyone that isn't Kurtz here, that attack has disadvantage. It's not guaranteed that they will actually attack Kurtz. It's just they get disadvantage if they don't. Nice. So let's see that happen. So here they go. They're using volley, which is an AoE attack. So they're going to have disadvantage on these rolls. Let's just let it all come out. So we can see here for Shadowheart, the attack had disadvantage. But for Kurtz, the person who cast it, it just had the normal attack roll, no disadvantage. And then on Gale, it had disadvantage. So where does this belong in my own opinion? I don't think it's that great. The main downside is its concentration element, and paladins, if they're going to be concentrating, could use probably use Bless. Very good spell to use instead. The one nice thing is that it's a bonus action. If it was an action, it'd be down in D tier, that's for sure. Against a boss, it's probably more useful in this situation. It's okay because the enemies are using area of effect attacks. But the more enemies that are in the fight, then the less useful it becomes. Most of the time, I'd probably just rather smite at an appropriate moment than use a spell slot for this because it only lasts 3 turns anyway. It's not even going to last overly long. Create Water. This is available to clerics, druids, and storm sorcerers at level 6. There is also a staff, the Rain Dancer, which you can get in the Druid's Grove very early on. I don't currently have it equipped, but that lets you cast it once per short rest, I believe. And if you upcast it, you do actually cover a much bigger area in water. I'm just going to use it at level 1. It's got multiple purposes, so if I use it on an enemy, there's no saving throw, automatically make them wet. Now, why might you want to be wet? Well, if you're casting it on yourself, it's because you want to be immune to burning, so if the fire's on ground, you cannot be set alight, which is great. And maybe you want to give yourself resistance to fire damage. It puts out flames. It's actually got lots of utility. But, massive but, you are vulnerable to lightning and cold damage. This is so over the top. Doubling damage almost at will. So I'm just going to use my cantrip here. 34, you know what, that wasn't even that great. That could have been better. 12 on 3d8. Plus I've got my spellcasting ability modifier added. Got doubled to 34. And that lasts for 3 turns. I don't think I have anyone else ready. Oh, right, no, I can do it here. So then I can cast, I don't know. This is obviously not really worth it, but just to show the effect. Something with cold damage and 40 damage and gone. This is just, I say abusable, it's not abusable, it's part of the game, and it's straight up to S tier. Like, I don't think any other spell can consistently double damage. I will say that the effect of this can be recreated from a bottle of water. He doesn't have any. But if you throw a bottle of water, then the enemies also get wet. But even so, Create Water is just such a good effect to cast on enemies, and in the right time for yourself, on your allies, it has to deserve S tier. Your wounds, available to bards, clerics, druids, paladins, and rangers, so quite a wide range of classes. And what does it do? It does 1d8 healing plus your casting modifier. If you upcast it, it does an extra 1d8 amount of healing. So I'm in combat. Let's say I want to heal Tav. I can do that, but it costs an action and it's melee range. Essentially, it's not often a good use in combat to do this, because the amount of damage I'm about to receive is going to completely outscale that. Even at the lower levels, will be the case. You might receive more than one attack per turn. I'm going to leave it in C tier. Do not use it in combat. It works particularly well with the Periaptive Wound Closure, I believe it's called, that maximizes healing rolls, and it partially depends on your playstyle. If you're trying to avoid long rests, casting this every now and again is actually very useful to kind of top up your health. But if you don't really mind, a short rest does the same thing outside of combat. So it's not really good inside of combat, and we've got alternatives outside of combat. And in combat, just drink a potion instead. Disguise Self. This is available to bards, sorcerers, wizards, trickery domain clerics, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, gloomstalkers, draconic bloodline sorcerers, if you're the gold ancestry, and warlocks can choose an invocation, the Mask of Many Faces, to get this. So it's widely available. Now this is the first example in this list of a ritual spell. So very quickly, ritual spells don't cost a spell slot when cast outside of combat. During combat, it would cost a level 1 spell slot. In fact, even in turn-based mode, it will use level 1 spell slots, so be careful with that. And so you get to choose to look like any race that you want, either masculine or feminine. So there he is, and it didn't use a spell slot, and so I can cast it again. Now I'm going to turn into a Githyanki, because this has many uses, this spell. One of them. Right, I've got the Soulbreaker Greatsword. Now this is Gale, this isn't the best person to use this on, but this is just the only character out of the slot who have currently got it. So when wielded by Githyanki, this weapon deals an additional 1d4 psychic damage. It's not a lot. Alright, I wouldn't usually use this on Gale. Boom, critical hit. And we rolled, well, 2d4 because it was a critical hit, but we rolled that 1d4 damage. Gale is not a Githyanki. You can use this to also change your size. Some areas are accessible by the smaller races. So for example, maybe I want to be a halfling. And so now I will fit into any sizes that only halflings fit into. Bear in mind, I don't get all the abilities that halflings have. It just changes your appearance. And lastly, if you've killed someone, you can actually use Speak with Dead if you use Disguise Self first. This is also going straight up to critical hit. In fact, any and every ritual in my book is a critical hit because they're all useful. They're all full of utility, especially Disguise Self. I mean, you can use this towards the beginning of the game. Make yourself look like a drow and you can just walk into the goblin camp. No problems at all. Everyone does what you say. Everyone is scared of you. Dissonant Whispers. This is available to bards and Great Old One warlocks. To target a single creature, they have to make a wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they will be frightened, so they can't move and they have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls. And also they take 3d6 damage. If they pass, they take half. So let's have a go. 65%, 40, 60. Yeah, not very likely actually. Oh, initiative. We have to wait to show you that. So we'll try it. I got a slightly higher chance because now the Null Flesh Nora is bloodless, which is nice. And they saved, which is unfortunate. If you do upcast the spell, it does an extra 1d6 damage per level. This is one of those spells that I think drops off in usefulness as you go up the levels. In the lower levels, 3d6 against a single target is pretty decent. Obviously, it's not guaranteed to be 3d6, but it is guaranteed damage at least. And the fear effect is quite strong, especially against a melee opponent. Then you can just walk away and they can't do anything on their turn. However, I would usually rather use my action to do something else, especially in a combat like this where there's lots of enemies. Maybe I should have focused it on the flint, perhaps. But you know what? Right now, I'd much rather have cast Cloud of Daggers down here, damaging all of these ones and almost killing them when it's their turn. I'd probably switch this out as a Baldur Warlock at level 5 for something else, because by that point you've got some much better spells to be learning. Find Favor! Available to War Domain Clerics and Paladins. So it uses a bonus action and concentration. And while you are concentrating on it, your weapon attacks deal an additional 1d4 radiant damage, and it lasts 3 turns. So let's cast it. Now I've kind of set this up to be very advantageous for the spell. I've got haste on him, I've got bless on him, so when he hits, should be doing a very large chunk of damage. Should be quite reliable. So we're getting the maximum use out of this because we're hitting with pretty much every attack, and we've got lots of attacks to be had. And he does have Savage Attacker, so he is re-rolling damage, but it requires concentration and it only lasts 3 turns. What could I do instead? I could just use a Divine Smite. A part of me wants me to put this in B. I feel like if you set everything up correctly, then maybe it's in B tier, but the fact is you have to set things up correctly, and it only lasts 3 turns. That's a real downside. It requires concentration, so if you use one of these smiting spells like Searing Smite or Bless, which is a very good choice to cast for a paladin, and then you can't use this, and it uses a spell slot, and most of the time probably going to be better just to use a Divine Smite as an opportune moment, usually being a critical hit, but also just trying to finish off an enemy. And at the lower levels, we don't have as many spell slots, and really we've only got 1 attack per turn. At higher levels like level 5, yes, we can get 2 attacks per turn, but on the first round we've used our bonus action, which maybe you've got Great Weapon Master, but you can't use Great Weapon Master the bonus action attack if you've used Divine Favor. So it's almost there, but at 3 turns it's just not quite good enough for me to go up to B tier. Enhanced Leap, which used to be called Jump. They've changed the name of it. My guess is maybe because we have a bonus action called Jump, perhaps. I'm not sure. What does it do? It triples a creature's jumping distance. Awesome. For 10 turns, does not require concentration, and it's a ritual. Oh yeah, right. So this is available to druids, sorcerers, wizards, rangers, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights. Also to Githyanki, although they can only cast it once per long rest. And there is an item, the Ring of Jumping, which is available from the Underdark, from the Dwarf Trader, Dareth Bonecloak, and with that ring you can use it once per short rest. And so this is just amazing. Outside of combat, this is so good for exploration. If you know you're about to get into a battle, you can cast this ahead of combat, outside of turn-based mode, outside of the battle, and then you can give yourself a jump. And even in combat, I know it costs a spell slot, but it can be really, really useful for some characters, especially melee classes, just to be able to get almost anywhere on the battlefield. Tripling jump distance is a massive thing. And as I said earlier, for me, ritual spells, all the ritual spells here are so good, and partially because they're ritual spells. So straight up to S tier it goes. Ensnaring Strike is up next, which is available to Rangers and Oath of the Ancient Paladins. So what does it do? You attack an enemy using it can be either ranged or melee attack, it's up to you, you get the option. It uses a bonus action and it uses up one of your attacks. So if you have multi-attack, so you're like a ranger here, you can use this and then attack afterwards, it's not a problem. You attack an enemy, you do some damage, and if they fail, I've already got entangle here. If they fail, they become entangled, which is really, really good actually, because then everyone else has advantage on attack rolls against them. They take 1d6 piercing damage at the start of their turn. They can resist this effect by passing a strength saving throw, so you want to be going for the weaker enemies. So Fist Crosshair's got 21 strength, it's pretty high. And in fact, this dwarf was not the best person to aim for either. Perhaps I should have aimed for... here, I should have gone for this humanoid. So here we go. There we are. They're ensnared. So at the start of the next turn, they'll take 1d6 damage. Their attack rolls have disadvantage. I'd say this wizard isn't likely to do any attack rolls, but interestingly, the dexterity saving throws have disadvantage. Now, it doesn't tell us that here, but this 96% is insanely high. All right, 80% over here with this fist, but 96% with these two. So you can maybe have a nice little combo if you've got a spell ready that forces a dexterity saving throw. So I'm going to put this in B tier. It's not the best. The one downside to it is that it does require your concentration, but it's nice that it works with just one of your attacks. It's not a whole action and can potentially debuff the enemy, and it's just a level 1 spell slot. Deals a bit of extra damage. If they fail the saving throw, they also can't move, and if you hit, you can then follow up with another attack. Entangle is next, and it follows on very nicely from Ensnaring Strike. It is only available to druids and bards via their magical secrets. So when you cast the spell, you'll see there's an area of effect, and anyone who fails a strength saving throw will be entangled. So attack rolls against these two enemies now have advantage, the dexterity saving throws have disadvantage. It is also difficult terrain, so Fist Cross will have to spend some extra movement speed to get through. One downside to this spell is that if you do have any sort of fire damage, it will set the whole thing on fire, which might sound cool, but actually that's really against what you're trying to do with this spell. You want the binds to be there to slow people down, to get them entangled. It does require concentration though. And the fact that it's on a druid is a bit sad because lots of spells on a druid require concentration. So for the effect, I think it's probably B tier as well. It's only really fair for putting Snaring Strike up there. And the fact that it's an area, it will affect your allies, so you have to be quite careful. Maybe later in the game it would come further down because we've got more and more spells that require concentration. I'm struggling between B and C. I'm going to leave it at B because the effect is good. But I couldn't use Fireball here because that would set everything alight, unless I just want to give everyone disadvantage on their strength saving throws, perhaps. Expeditious Retreat. This is available to sorcerers, warlocks, wizards, arcane tricksters, and eldritch knights. So it uses a bonus action, kind of nice. And you also gain dash on the turn you cast it. So I'm going from 30 feet of movement speed. I've now got 60 feet of movement speed. And I can, in future turns, it's over here, I can use dash as a bonus action. Which sounds nice, won't lie. For arcane tricksters, it's pointless because they can always dash as a bonus action anyway. Now, as nice as the effect is, there is a pair of boots, the boots of speed, which give you this permanently anyway, and it requires concentration. And my sorcerers, warlocks, and wizards are almost certainly wanting to use their concentration for something else. Fairy Fire. This is available to bards, druids, light domain clerics, archfey warlocks, and drow, and drow half elves get it at level 3. So it's another concentration spell that has an area of effect. Quite a large area. Upcasting doesn't do anything. And anyone inside, this is allies, objects, enemies, neutral people. If they fail a dexterity saving throw, all attacks against them now have advantage and they can't do anything against it. It also lights up anyone who is invisible within that area if they fail the dexterity saving throw. I think this is a solid A tier. Having advantage against enemies is always going to be good. The only real downside to it is it requires concentration, and for some of these classes there are lots of things competing for concentration, but you've got to make that decision yourself. Mostly useful if you have more enemies in an area. If you've got a single enemy, I'd say there are probably other spells to cast, but it's a solid pick all the way through for a level 1 spell. False Life, available to sorcerers, wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, and bards can get it from their magical secrets. Also, warlocks can choose an invocation, Fiendish Figure, and when warlocks choose this invocation, they can cast this without using a spell slot. So what does it do? I forgot to prepare the spell, but I do have some scrolls of it. So you gain 7 temporary hit points. It uses an action. You can only cast it on yourself. So now I've got 7 temporary hit points, yay! So in combat, I'd say this is not a good use whatsoever because it requires your action. This is something you would usually cast ahead of time. At the beginning of the day, before a combat, you don't really want to be using your action to give yourself 7 temporary hit points. Even at level 1 and 2, it's not necessarily the best idea. It's usually better to try and get rid of some people. If you're a warlock and you've picked this invocation, it's going to be S tier. It's just a free 7 temporary hit points after every fight. In the lower levels, I'd probably put it maybe at B because it doesn't require concentration or anything. It does require a spell slot. But as you get higher and higher, the 7 temporary hit points mean less and less. Yes, you can actually upcast this. You get 5 extra temporary hit points per spell level. So level 2 would be like 12 temporary hit points and so on, but the number of temporary hit points you get per spell level just isn't enough to keep up with the damage that's done to you. I wouldn't want to spend any spell slots using this, so I'm going to leave it at C tier. Unless of course if you're a warlock with invocation, in which case S tier is fine. Wrathful. Available to bards, sorcerers, wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, draconic bloodline sorcerers if they've got the cold ancestry, and there is an item called Mistress Grace which can be found from the arcane tower in the chest of the mundane in the Underdark. So what does it do? You and your allies gain immunity to falling damage for 10 turns. Oh, look at that, it's a ritual. So here we are. Outside of combat we can cast it as much as we want. No spell slot is used. And then, because we want to, we can jump down. Oh no, apparently Gil doesn't want to do that. There we are. No worries. And hopefully everyone will follow. No, I'm getting FPS issues since patch 3. I've not been in Baldur's Gate since patch 3. Okay, the others aren't following. I'm not 100% certain why, but I can make them jump down myself. Inside combat, it does use a spell slot and a bonus action. Straight up to S tier. Perfect for exploring. And not even a bad choice in combat. If you really need someone to get down somewhere safely, I would use a spell slot to do that. Easy S tier. I feel like every party should have someone with Featherfall. Find Familiar, available to wizards and rangers if they pick the Natural Explorer Beast Tamer option. Eldritch Knights, Arcane Tricksters, and Warlocks if they are packed to the chain. You can also get this from the Ritual Caster feat. So you can cast it once per short rest, but it is a ritual. And you get to choose one of these 6 variants for your usual Find Familiar. None of them is like overly strong in terms of like number of hit points or amount of damage they do, but they're all great for utility. And the Raven, I think in particular, has Rend Vision, where if it hits an enemy, it blinds them. There's no saving throw against being blinded, which I think is really, really awesome. They're straight up blinded, and it's good just to have an extra body on the battlefield. Each of the different familiars has a slightly different use. They've got slightly different actions. This video isn't about Find Familiar, so I'm not going to go through all of them. Minsk in particular can have Find Familiar Boo to summon his hamster. You can also have Find Familiar Scratch if you get him in your camp and he gives you his ball. Now I know people don't like seeing their familiars getting downed in battle, but it's fine. You can summon them again after a short rest. They actually just run back to camp. They're not actually killed. You don't need to worry about it. And another ritual, another S tier. There's no, if you've got this spell, there's no reason not to use it. It doesn't use the spell slot outside of combat, so like why wouldn't you do that? And it gives so much utility. And kind of following on from this, we've got Find Familiar, Summon Cheeky Imp. Actually, we slightly misnamed this here. There it is. It's Find Familiar Cheeky Quasit. So if you find the scroll inside... Do you know what? I'm just going to go show you. So in case you're unaware of where to find this scroll, there's only one of them in the game. Blighted Village in Act 1, fairly early on. Come into the house right next to the sigil. Down the wooden hatch. Now, I'm skipping over some of this. I'm not exploring all the containers or anything. There is a lever just behind these 3 crates. You could shoot it, it's fine. You can move the crates. You can destroy the crates. And it opens up, or moves a bookshelf. And it opens up a secret doorway. And through this doorway, down in one particular casket, this one right here, you've got Scroll of Summon Quasit. Scroll is destroyed upon use. I don't currently have a wizard right here, but you can get a wizard to learn the scroll like they would learn any other scroll. So after you learn the spell, we do get this Find Familiar Cheeky Quasit. And you can summon the Quasit, whatever you named him. You can, if you slowed the video down there, you might have seen it said shovel first, then basket. Yeah, summon shovel, but I've got basket. But you can only have one familiar at a time, so Scratch was sent back to camp, and the Quasit has come here instead. Another easy S tier. Quasits are great actually, because they're slightly stronger than most familiars. They have resistance to slashing, piercing, bludgeoning, damage, and fire, lightning, and cold. And they can scare enemies. They can go invisible for as long as you want. And then you can send them around and go and potentially scout ahead. And they do some damage, not the most, but, you know, it's a decent amount. Fog Cloud. This is available to druids, sorcerers, wizards, Tempest Domain clerics, rangers, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, and draconic bloodline sorcerers also know this spell, so it's quite widely known. So what does it do? I've already cast it just to show you something. So the cloud blinds and heavily obscures creatures within it. It's got a 15-foot radius with a 60-foot range. It requires concentration, sadly. It can be upcast to actually increase the area, a larger radius. Now what I've already done is I was kind of very lucky with my initiative in this situation, is I cast Fog Cloud and everyone is hiding within it. So if I just go to the enemy's turns, I'm hiding in the Fog Cloud, they can't see me, they don't move. You can hide everyone within it. As soon as you do anything that gets you out of hiding, such as attacking or casting a spell, some spells will let you stay inside hiding actually, then you will be seen. Now in this particular situation, perhaps it's not the most useful. What you can do if you're feeling like you want this to go on for a long time is perhaps use an offhand attack, a bonus action essentially. Attack, go back inside and use your action to hide. Some subclasses and classes can hide with a bonus action, which means they can actually come out, attack with their action or do whatever with their action, and then come back inside and hide again with their bonus action, which makes it kind of broken in that sense. And you can also cast it over enemies. This might get this counterspelled by the fist here, but that'll be okay because I've got other people with the spell. Yeah, there comes the counterspell. So then Gale can now cast Fog Cloud, but he does have to come out of the Fog Cloud to actually be able to see. There we are. He's also been spotted. So compare Fog Cloud up over there, and it blinds them. Now, if I try and attack them, I actually have disadvantage and advantage, but cancel each other out. It's too dark. If you've got dark vision, you gain advantage. So Gale was not the best person to use this, but Shadowheart with dark vision now just has advantage against these two in here. So this can be used both offensively and defensively, and you can kind of cheese it if you've got people who can hide with a bonus action especially, or someone who's hasted, who can come out, use an action, and come back in and hide. Perfectly abusable, which pretty much puts it up to S tier. I don't particularly like using it in this way. It's just not what I like to do anymore. But if you're happy to use it, it really is an S tier spell. Good Berry is next. This can be learned by druids and rangers. So when you cast it, you create 4 berries who heal 1d4 hit points each. And you cast it on anyone you want. It puts it straight into their inventory. Let's give it to Gale. So here he's got 4 good berries now. They provide 1 camp supply and use a bonus action. You have to heal 1d4 hit points. So there's a 1. You know, it could be better. 4, 1, 2. On average, should heal about 10 hit points. I wouldn't cast this inside combat. I'd cast it ahead of combat or after. It heals much less than a healing potion, so in combat maybe not the best, but only uses up a spell slot, which to me is a bit better than using up a consumable, though we can have loads of minor healing potions. When I say healing potion, I do mean minor healing potion. The ones that are bigger, larger than minor healing potions obviously heal a lot more than this. I think earlier in the game, I'm going to leave this at C. This is one of those that earlier in the game, it's kind of fine. It's good. Can heal you, gives you camp supplies I suppose if you need it, if you've got any spell slots left over at the end of the day. But towards the end of the game it just doesn't heal enough. I'd much rather just use a healing spell, or perhaps a potion by that point. And you can't throw them at people to heal them. So if I throw a good berry at Gale, it just is used as a throwing projectile. No cloud is formed, no healing can be gained from throwing them. Grease, available to wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, and black draconic bloodline sorcerers. So you cover the ground in grease, you get a certain area, and you possibly make them fall prone. It's also difficult terrain. Very nicely, it doesn't require concentration. So there's an example of it, making them fall prone. That didn't start combat, surprisingly. One thing to note is if an enemy falls prone during their turn, or you yourself, you lose your action, you lose your turn. I also want to point out there used to be a bug with a lot of the surface effects where the DC was set at 12, but now it is dependent on the spellcaster, so the DC here was 18. It is flammable, so if you cast any sort of fire damage, it will set alight. And I've seen people, mostly in early access, say that, oh wow, this is like a fireball. It just does 1d4 fire damage. It's not really that much. It can set people burning, so if you want it for that, I suppose it's good, but I wouldn't use it for its damaging potential whatsoever. I think it's solid B tier, doesn't require concentration, it's a very good debuff, but it affects your allies, so you do have to be a bit careful with it. Sometimes just causing more damage is better than using grease. The problem with a lot of these spells is they're competing against all the other spells that you know. So Gal here could have Conjured and Elemental instead. Cloud of Daggers, Glyph of Warding is an awesome spell. Guiding Bolts are available to clerics and bards via magical secrets. So it's a spell that requires an attack roll to hit, does 4d6 damage when it hits. Now this is better than most level 1 spells in terms of damage, and is almost as good as a cantrip at level 11 even. If you hit, the next attack roll has advantage. Because it's an attack roll, it means we can get bonuses from things like high ground, like I've got here.
You will witness
There's
assaulting someone.
an okay amount of damage, and is a source of advantage. So if Minsk here wants to shoot, he's got sharpshooter, so having advantage really helps. I'm going to do a lot of damage with this. So perhaps I want to use... yeah, let's use volley, shall we? So there we are. I hit that character, hit that enemy. Don't have advantage now that it's been hit. For clerics, this is an A tier spell. As we get to the higher levels, as I've already mentioned with the other level 1 spells that do damage, it doesn't quite keep up, really, with other spells that we get. But the fact that it gives us advantage on the next attack roll, and it is an attack roll, both are very good. And for clerics, they don't get many attack roll spells. We do have one coming up later, Inflict Wounds, and there are ways for them to get Produce Flame, but otherwise it's not very common. And until maybe level 10, where we get the higher cantrip damage, it's actually a decent amount of damage. It's a good amount of damage. Hail of Thorns! This is available to rangers. And there are a pair of gloves in the Zentrum Traders beneath Walking Rest that will give you access to this. So what does it do? You attack for your weapon damage. Currently I've got Sharpshooter on, which is why it's plus 17. And then it explodes. There's a small radius, and every enemy within that radius has to make a dexterity saving throw. If they fail, they take the 1d10 damage. If they pass, they take half the damage. If you upcast it, it deals an additional 1d10 piercing damage. And if you cast it at level 3, it doesn't require a bonus action, because it does require bonus action, right? It's a bit sad, actually. I wonder if she's going to counterspell this. Oh, no. So we can see I did 1 piercing damage to Fist Cross. And it looks like it wasn't even... for some reason, it hasn't taken any damage here. That looks like it's a bug. Needless to say, I'm actually not very impressed with this, because it required... in combat, it requires an action and a bonus action. And 1d10 damage just isn't enough to justify it, and the range is very small. I'd much rather use my level 1 spell slots than something else. At first I was considering maybe B tier, but the radius is so small, and 1d10 damage just isn't enough to make up for that, and it's an action and bonus action. I'm going between C and complete critical miss. I'm going to leave it at C because it's access to some sort of AoE for rangers. At higher levels, just give a second for Minsk's turn to turn up. So at higher levels, we get better options of Conjure Barrage that does require you to get closer. But it's quite a large area, to be fair. I could use Lightning Arrow. And as a Hunter Ranger, I've only got Volley. It's way better. Way better than Hail of Thorns. Oh, that's not critical miss. And I get to do that twice. Hail of Thorns takes a whole action even. I don't know, so maybe at the lower levels... much better. Maybe at the lower levels it's C tier, the high levels complete D. There's no doubt about that. But because it can get you through the lower levels, I'm going to leave it here. I'm so tempted to put it down at D though. Let me know what you think about this, because I think it's just not... it sounds cool, it looks cool, but it doesn't actually do very well when it comes down to it. Healing Word, I'm sure most of you know where this is going to go. It is available to bards, clerics, and druids. It requires a bonus action, heals 1d4 plus your modifier. If you upcast it, you heal an extra 1d4 damage, 1d4 hit points. But it's amazing because it's a bonus action, and it's got a range. Got a 60-foot range here. Completely outdoes Cure Wounds because it requires a bonus action in combat and has a range. Really useful for getting people up if they are downed. You can have items that buff when you heal. I don't remember if Shadowheart's got any. There we are, she does. She has the gloves. Right, I've just applied Blade Ward to somebody. Awesome. Easy S tier. Always has been, always will be. Hellish Rebuke. Available to Warlocks, Oathbreaker Paladins, Bards from the Magical Secrets, and Asmodeus Tieflings when they get to level 3. It's fairly unique. It requires a reaction, and if an enemy hits you, then you can cast this at them, dealing 2d10 fire damage. It's plus 1d10 per spell level higher. I do have a level 12 Warlock, so I am using a level 5 Warlock spell slot to do this. They have to make a dexterity saving throw, and if they pass, then they take half the damage. Now, I've accidentally gone and equipped Will with Duelist's Prerogative, which gives him an extra reaction, so he can probably potentially use this up to twice per turn. Also, just want to point out, this does give you Compelled Duel also as a spell to cast. So let's try and get into some trouble.
You were witnessed assaulting someone.
The one thing I can try and do is this, so I can use Hellish Rebuke. Boom, 32 hit points of damage. That is because he's using a level 5 spell slot to cast that, though. The best thing is it lets you weaponize your reaction, which not many classes... There we go, because I've got 2 reactions. Boom. Obviously, I've used 2 of my 3 spell slots now at level 11, but we can try and finish them off with our bonus action. There we are. Now, I did show it off kind of in its best light, where I've got a character with 2 reactions, in which case it might seem like it's S or A tier. I don't often use it myself. I'm going to put down a B tier. Why B tier? Because it's fire damage, and we do have a fair few enemies who are resistant to fire damage. I was thinking about putting it at A, and one problem with it is that using a level 1 spell slot, 2d10 fire damage, it's not the best. And if they pass a saving throw, it gets halved. It's quite unique in that we don't get many spells that let us use a reaction to damage the enemy. Heroism is next. It is available to bards and paladins. So what does it do? You target yourself or an ally. It doesn't have to be yourself. They are immune to being frightened and gain 5 temporary hit points at the start of each turn. Bear in mind, temporary hit points do not stack and just have the highest instance of them. So it can kind of act as kind of damage reduction from 1 attack per turn. So let's cast it on himself. So can't be frightened anymore, but it does require concentration, which is pretty sad. And you only get them at the temporary hit points at the start of your turn, so if he takes any damage... There we are. He has to wait until next turn before he can get those temporary hit points back. So I'm going to stick this in C tier. It's not the worst thing in the world or anything, but 5 temporary hit points in the early game is much more useful. Enemies aren't doing as much damage and don't have as many attacks. So it does act as kind of like a damage reduction if you look at it that way. But by the time we get to the higher levels, where they've got multi-attack and doing extra damage, that 5 might not add up to be enough to save you. It does last 10 turns, but combats are usually over within 10 turns, so it's not like we're getting a full 50 damage reduction over the course of 10 turns. But if you know you're going to be in a combat where you can be frightened, then it definitely goes up. It's a bit situational, has its uses, but it's not going to come in useful for most combats, especially further into the game. X, available to Warlocks, and Lawbards can get it via magical secrets. This is a much misunderstood spell sometimes, especially for people new to the game. So you target an enemy, and they gain disadvantage on an ability of your choosing. Now what this really means is they get disadvantage on checks. Not all rolls that use strength, just checks, meaning skill checks. So it doesn't affect attack rolls and it doesn't affect saving throws. If it did affect probably either of those, or especially saving throws, it'd be way overpowered for a level 1 spell. Also, so you target an enemy, let's start with that. Oh no, I've got Blade Ward going. Nobody likes it. Requires concentration to keep. Hopefully we don't lose concentration before then. It's not the end of the world if we do. And so if I hit this enemy while they have any type of hex, I deal an additional 1d6 necrotic damage. So we can see here, this is the extra 1d6, the 5 on 1d6. I've also got some other bonuses that deal necrotic damage on a hit. And so you keep doing that damage until you either lose concentration or until they die. If and when an enemy dies, you can then recast this. And when you recast it, you do not use a spell slot. This works well with Eldritch Blast in particular, just because you can get many blasts off, especially at the high levels anyway, 5 and 10. I'm going to stick this at A, but you do need to be careful with it. It's not the be-all and end-all of spells for a Warlock. The main downside is that it requires concentration. And as a Warlock, there are other spells that require concentration that are just as, if not better. Hunger of Hadar is an amazing spell. It's a level 3 spell, but requires concentration. I can't cast both at once. if you become Pact to the Tome, you'll get guidance. And so after every battle, if you cast guidance with your Warlock, they'll lose concentration on Hex. So do be careful. It doesn't apply to spells that don't require an attack roll, so anything that requires a saving throw does not work with Hex. Magic Missile does not work with Hex because there is no attack roll. Also, at high levels, you might have other uses for your bonus action, so the opportunity cost of using Hex can be high depending on your subclass and your situation. Hunter's Mark is next. This is available to Rangers, Oath of Vengeance Paladins, and Bards via the Magical Secrets. There are a couple of items that give Hunter's Mark from Act 1, the Grimskull Helm and the Hunting Shortbow. The Hunting Shortbow you can buy from the Druid's Grove. What does it do? It's almost exactly the same as Hex, actually. So you target an enemy, and if you hit them with a weapon attack, this time it has to be a weapon attack, you deal an additional 1d6 damage. Takes a bonus action to cast, requires concentration. And so we did an extra, where's it gone here? At the very end, +6 on 1d6 Hunter's Mark damage. And every attack you do, let's maybe turn off Great Weapon Master now. Every attack you do, this gets added to. So if I use Lacerate, for example, we still get a Hunter's Mark there. So more useful on classes that have multiple attacks. Why not? So the damage can really add up there. Again, I'm going to stick this at A. It's good that it uses a bonus action. It's bad that it uses concentration. Rangers, for example, might want to use their concentration on other spells. And if you're dual wielding, then this doesn't work out very well because if you kill a target, you have to use a bonus action to reapply it. So do be careful when using it. And again, just regarding concentration, you have to maintain it. Ice Knife. This can be learned by druids, sorcerers, wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, and also bards from their magical secrets. What does it do? So you target an enemy and does 1d6 piercing damage if it hits, and then there is an explosion of cold damage, which is 2d6 cold damage. They can resist some of the damage from the explosion if they make a dexterity saving throw. Also, it leaves an ice surface and it can be cast while silenced, interestingly. So let's see it in action. I don't have any enemies nearby each other apart from around Tav. You don't actually have to target an enemy, but you do extra damage if you do. So I'm going to get poor Tav here, right? Let's do this. He can be resistant to it, fine. And we can see it created ice there, and all the surfaces that were connected that could be frozen were frozen. Now, like with the other damaging cantrips at level 1, it really falls off as you go up in levels. However, it does have some utility because it can knock people prone if they slip on the ice, and you can double the cold damage if somebody is wet. At the lower levels, Ice Knife is really good. It does a really good amount of damage, and it's an AoE at level 1, which we didn't get a huge number of, which we can use at range. So kind of at level 1, level 2, I'd probably put it at, or even up to level 4, put it at A tier. Then we get to level 5 and it starts coming down. By the time we get to level 10 especially, it's probably C tier. I think I'm going to leave it at B tier because it does have utility like Chromatic Orb. It does more damage than Chromatic Orb potentially if we've got a large area, because Chromatic Orb only does damage to a single target and then creates a surface, whereas Ice Knife is actually an area of effect. And yeah, having double damage on wet targets and creating an ice surface if you want it is very useful. Inflicts Wounds. Available to Clerics and Oathbreaker Paladins only. It's a very simple spell. It does 3d10 necrotic damage. It requires an attack roll. Unfortunately, melee range. If you upcast it, you can then deal an extra 1d10 necrotic damage per level. So let's just try this out. 80%, 70%, let's go for this.
Witnessed assaulting some.
Simple, easy to use, worthwhile using, I would say. I'm going to stick this in B tier also. We've got to bear in mind this is for Clerics and Oathbreaker Paladins only, and their cantrips, well, they don't get Firebolt, for example, or Eldritch Blast. Yes, you might have a particular character who has one of those spells, one of those cantrips, or you've multiclassed or whatever. This helps Clerics actually be damage dealers, and this is really good used against someone who's asleep or paralyzed, where you have an automatic critical hit. Of course, that's true for lots of spells. And the nice thing is it can be upcast. We can't do that with cantrips. It's a solid level 1 spell to have as a backup. If you're in melee, in case someone is put to sleep or paralyzed, you can really start dishing out damage. Unfortunately, it is necrotic damage, so it is resisted by enemies throughout a lot of Act 2. So it's not going to be useful all the time. Longstrider. This is available to bards, druids, wizards, rangers, arcane tricksters, and eldritch knights. I've actually got this from the ritual caster feat for Gale. So you can cast it on someone. They gain Longstrider, movement speed increased by 10 feet until long rest. It doesn't require concentration, and you can cast it on as many different people as you want. So you can give Longstrider to your whole party. Since he's gained this from Ritual Caster, he can't upcast it actually. But when you do upcast it, you can target an additional creature, just make life a bit easier I suppose when you're casting it. There we are. Straight up to S. I mean, giving your whole party an extra 10 feet of movement speed, what isn't to like? If you have it as a spell, as a wizard, you need to make sure you've always got it actually prepared. If you unprepare it, you lose the effect. It does mean you can get someone in your camp to cast it on your whole party and leave them in camp, because it doesn't require concentration, if that's your thing. Mage Armor. This is available to sorcerers, wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, and warlocks can get an invocation Armor of Shadows to cast this on themselves, and it doesn't require a spell slot when they do that, which can be used to, if you're multiclass with an abjuration wizard, to increase your arcane ward. What does it do? Very simple. If you're not wearing any armor, this is any armor, your armor class then becomes 13 plus dexterity instead of 10 plus dexterity. So you cast it. Now Gale's armor class is 20, and it says +3 for mage armor. It's not actually +3, it's 13 should be your base armor class. It's just how it's written. You can use a shield and still gain the benefit of this, but nothing else he's wearing counts as armor. If you unprepare it, he loses the effect, so you do need to keep it in your prepared spell list. Get it, use it. It helps increase the armor class of your spellcaster if they're not proficient with some sort of armor already. If they are proficient, you just don't need to use it. If they're not proficient with armor, get it and use it, I would say. Magic Missile. This is available to sorcerers, wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, and bards via their magical secrets. Psychic Spark Necklace can give you this once per long rest. There's a hand crossbow that gives you this as a level 3 spell slot once per long rest. And what does it do? Shoot 3 magical darts, each dealing 2 to 5 force damage. They always hit their target. So you can pick 3 targets. If you upcast it, you can choose more. You get to send out more darts. I wouldn't use a level 6 spell slot normally. Let's do level 2, shall we? Alright, 1, 2, 3. I don't know. What about this one? Now, it wasn't actually the magical missiles that killed them as such. But I just want to point out that this synergizes very well with the cold, I'm preoccupied, but the cold, the weak tadpole power, where if the enemy gets to a hit point title lower than the total number of illithid powers you've got, they automatically die. And since these guys, obviously haven't quite got 17 illithid powers here, but Magic Missile can bring them down just that little bit. This is such a good spell. It's not really about the total damage done, because it's not a lot. 2 to 5 damage per missile. Okay, you can increase the number of missiles with the Psychic Spark Necklace, but if you've got enemies who are just at a lower number of hit points, they're just alive, you can use this. You can force 3 concentration checks. If you hit someone who is concentrating, it always hits. There's no way it can miss. And like I said here, like I showed here, it can synergize very well with Cold Weak. Protection from evil and good. This is available to clerics, warlocks, wizards, paladins, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights. Rangers can get it from their favored enemy, Keeper of the Veil. And after the hag, if you defeat the hags, there is a necklace that lets you cast this once per short rest. So what does it do? You use concentration and you cast it on anyone you want, an ally. That ally can't be charmed or frightened or possessed by aberrations, celestials, elementals, fays, fiends, and undead. They also have those types of enemies also have disadvantage on attack rolls against that character. So I'm going to cast it on Lae'zel. Going to run away. This is very early on in the game. Then Lae'zel is going to start this combat.
Proceeding.
All by herself. You can do that by trying to pick up skeletons, which I think is quite funny. So she's going to go around trying to get rid of all of these skeletons. And we'll find they did have disadvantage. They happened to roll exactly what they needed. And that's happened again. That's just them being lucky, rolling 14 with disadvantage. Got no music in the background, don't know why. There we are, I missed. but this does require concentration, which is one reason I've sent the others away, or Shadowheart in particular. Is my hope is that with this very high armor class and disadvantage, they won't be able to hit her. I'm going to stick this in B tier. It has its uses throughout the game, but it's not always going to be that useful, and if it does require concentration, upcasting it doesn't allow you to pick more people to apply it to. If it did, it would be much more useful potentially. It does have a use also against the hag. Some of you are going to tell me that. You can put on the mask inside the hag's lair, but cast protection from evil and good on yourself, and then you can go wandering through without being possessed by the hag. Ray of Sickness. This is available to sorcerers, wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights. Green draconic bloodline sorcerers can get it. You can get it from the Staff of Crones. Once per short rest, warlocks can get an invocation at level 7, the Book of Ancient Secrets, but then they can only cast it once per long rest without using a spell slot. What does it do? You have an attack roll, which if it hits, does 2d8 poison damage. Then the target makes the Constitution saving throw. If they fail, they are poisoned. Try and use it against the wizard.
You were witnessed assaulting some.
So the wizard is now poisoned for 2 turns, which means they have disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks. So I mean, yeah, it's 2d8 damage. If we upcast it, we deal an extra 1d8 damage per level, a spell slot used. But the use is a level 1 spell slot. At lower levels, it's okay, but as we get higher and higher, the damage is poison damage. The damage isn't enough. It gets resisted. And the Constitution saving throw for being poisoned, I mean, I guess it's okay against a boss. Someone who's more difficult to fight. It's trying to do 2 things at once. You know, does some damage, gives a debuff, but the damage isn't really enough. And the debuff is only for attack rolls and ability checks. So if they're a spellcaster even, it's not going to be useful if they're casting a spell that requires a saving throw anyway. It doesn't affect the enemy's saving throws, so it has its uses. It's not quite bad enough to be D tier, but eventually the debuff just isn't enough, and the damage isn't anywhere near enough to keep up with your cantrips even. Sanctuary is next. This is available to clerics, Oath of Devotion paladins, and bards via their magical secrets. Here it is. You or an ally cannot be targeted until you attack or harm a creature. You still take damage from area spells. So if I move away, you can see I'm going to take an opportunity attack, especially if I run past. We've got 2 arrows coming out. It takes a bonus action to cast. There we are. Now I've got Sanctuary on me. I can run past. I can do what I want. I won't get targeted. However, if I do hurt someone or cast a spell that hurts someone, let's say this. I didn't even hurt them, right? I just cast a spell. Sanctuary blocked. Affected entity can't receive Sanctuary. I don't have another character here who can cast it, but I wouldn't be able to cast it on her right now. So this can kind of go up into S tier. I've never really used it this way. But what you can do in theory is have someone attack on their turn. And then let's just say, I don't know, Lame Strike. And then cast Sanctuary on themselves. So she can come up here right in their faces and she won't get targeted. So you could use someone to block a doorway. She's not quite in the right position to do that. She almost is. So now on her turn, it's her next turn. Now unfortunately, she can't cast Sanctuary on herself again. But I think this has changed in the last couple of patches. I'm going to move this down to A tier. It doesn't require concentration. You can cast it on other people. It's only 10 turns, so it's not, you can't just walk through somewhere and not worry about it completely outside of combat. If you're somewhere you shouldn't be, you could still get targeted after 10 turns. Searing Smite. This is available to paladins and Zariel tieflings at level 3. There is also a light hammer down near the arcane tower called Skybreaker, which gives you this once per long rest. What does it do? You deal an extra 1d6 fire damage when you hit, and then while you maintain concentration, the target receives an extra 1d6 fire damage. I'm a bit paranoid I'm going to miss this, even at 85% chance, so I'm going to turn off Great Weapon Master. Now it does use your action and bonus action. Well, I say action, I mean it uses up one of your attack actions, so you can still attack afterwards. Now they failed their saving throw, which is good. I can continue to attack. No, I didn't turn this on. You can also use your Divine Smite on top of that there to deal even more damage, but that then requires 2 spell slots. So if we skip to her turn, assuming I maintain concentration, I don't. Well, they would have had an extra 1d6 fire damage. Now, unless your enemy is vulnerable to Searing Smite, I really don't like it. I mean, if you want to deal extra damage, I would really just use the Divine Smite you get as a paladin. The fact that you need to maintain concentration really sucks, which means you can't concentrate on anything else or overwrites it. Or as soon as you try to concentrate on anything else, this gets overwritten, and it's only an extra 1d6 fire damage. Fire damage does get resisted a fair amount, sadly. Maybe if this was a different type of damage, I'd put it up to C tier. Maybe if it didn't require concentration, I'd definitely put it up to C tier. But the fact is, you're better off just using a Divine Smite and killing someone earlier than letting them live, potentially. Just use Divine Smite instead. Shield is up next. This is available to Sorcerers, Wizards, Arcane Tricksters, and Eldritch Knights. There are some items, such as the Amulet of Harpers, which you can get from the Last Light Inn, the Shield of Shielding, and the Elegant Studded Leather Armor, which all give you at once per long or maybe short rest. And it's another spell that's a reaction, so I can't just cast it. When you're about to be hit by an enemy, you increase your armor class by 5 until the start of your next turn, and you take no damage from Magic Missile. This only comes into play if an attack would hit you. I'm going to move Gale here. I don't know if it's going to work. Oh, I don't have enough movement. Right, we'll see if any attacks come his way. Now, it didn't come up there because it's a critical hit, so shield has no effect against critical hits. And it must mean this time that she rolled high enough. Plus 5 to 17 is 22, so it would have had no effect, so we don't waste the spell slot, which is nice. Same thing here, just high enough that shield have made no difference. And part of that is because my armor class is a bit too low for what it should be. At this point in the game, I should have mage armor. Well, let's actually cast mage armor with the action. So when the opportunity attacks come in, oh, she dismissed anyway. Didn't need to use it there. I'm going to stay in their faces. Hopefully they come up to Gale still. I'm going to see if I can make it happen again. No. So let's try and make this happen now. Just going to keep trying to get shield going. Oh, of course, another critical hit. Loads of critical hits coming out from her. She's either hitting or missing. This is a bit of a shame. Can't show you shield. Here we are. They rolled 21. No, I can make the miss. My armor class was now 25. Easy S tier. Massive utility. It uses a reaction, not an action or bonus action. Stops your spellcasters from being hurt. Works really well with maybe an Eldritch Knight. Someone with already a high armor class. Makes it even higher. Makes them even more difficult to hit. Shield of Faith now. This is available to Clerics and Paladins. The Sword of Justice and the Dark Justiciar Halfplate also give you this once per short rest. So what does it do? It uses a bonus action, which is lovely, to increase the armor class of a creature by 2 until long rest, assuming you maintain concentration. So I can give it to Gale. His base armor class is now 22, which caused that to miss, which is pretty cool. Actually, did it cause it to miss? No, it would have missed anyway. Still being hit by her. Now, this kind of shows, in one sense, the fact that this isn't necessarily the best at the high levels. At low levels, I'd put this at A. But as we get to higher and higher levels, the attack bonuses of enemies start to get really high sometimes. So even an extra 2 armor class doesn't guarantee they're going to miss. The main downside to it is it does require concentration. And as a cleric, I'd probably rather have Bless. It's not a bad spell by any means, but at the end of the day, it's just a flat +2 bonus to a single creature. If we could upcast it and apply it to other creatures, then yes, I'd probably put this further up. As we get to the high levels, its use gets less and less effective. Leap! Available to bards, sorcerers, wizards, archfey, warlocks, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, the brass ancestry for draconic bloodline sorcerers. And what does it do? Well, put creatures into a magical slumber. Select targets up to a combined 24 hit points. If you upcast it, you can put a higher number of hit points of enemies to sleep. And it goes up by 8 each time. So 32, level 3 is 40. Unfortunately for me, Blaze Liara Patir, she's got 33 hit points. So I can't use a level 2 spell slot. Bear in mind, some enemies are immune to sleep. such as undead and those of Fey ancestry, so you've got to be careful. Why would you do this? Well, it takes them out of the combat for 2 turns. They can be shoved awake by their allies, so do be careful. And then a melee attack has a critical hit automatically. I'm going to put this in A tier with the caveat that you do have to be careful. Enemies will shove each other awake. Now, if you can put multiple enemies to sleep, that's really good. They're using their bonus actions up. But if you pick someone who's going to miss their next turn, and even better, if you can put someone to sleep like I did earlier and then have one of your characters attack them for a critical hit, it's even better. Again, at higher levels, its use kind of drops off because you're going to start to be able to do enough damage that you may as well just hit them and kill them anyway, rather than just use sleep. But it's always a good level 1 spell to have. Speak with animals. This is available to bards, druids, niche domain clerics, rangers, oath of the ancient paladins, wild heart barbarians, and forest gnomes. Warlocks can also pick this up as an invocation called beast speech from level 2. It is a ritual, so we can cast it without a spell slot, and then you can comprehend and communicate with beasts. Now, Scratch here always gets all the attention for good reasons. He's the best boy, but you can speak to other animals, believe it or not. Here's Krug, a scaredy cat. Now, sometimes animals give you information, other ways of doing quests, and it's just cool. It's a ritual. Lets you speak with Scratch. What's not to love? Up into S tier. Down to the last 5 spells. So, Tasha's Hideous Laughter. This is available to bards, wizards, great old one warlocks, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, copper ancestry, draconic bloodline sorcerers, and that's it. So, Gale here has Tasha's Hideous Laughter. The target has to make a wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they are prone for 10 turns. However, each time they take damage, and it doesn't say it here, and at the end of each of its turns, it can make another saving throw to try and get back up. At higher levels, it doesn't do anything, so... And it does require concentration, which is one of the worst things about it, actually. So they're rolling on the floor laughing. We have advantage against them. Of course, they've got a critical miss somehow. Ah, no. The enemy used protection. Fair enough. Right. Come on, one of these has got to hit, surely. No. Alright, fair enough. So if Will here tries... Right, they got to make 3 saving throws. Even though we only hit him once. For each source of damage, pretty much. Not exactly every single source, but nearly. And taken out. Now, the reason he failed is because Gale's spell save DC is particularly high right now. So I'm going to put this into... I'm thinking between B and C. In early access, you used to get critical hits against enemies who were under the effects of the spell. That got taken out. It shouldn't really have been like that anyway. Now, although I did just use it to pretty much take out an enemy, maybe it'd be more useful if it was against a boss. What I don't like is, unless you've got someone with a particularly high spell save DC, they get loads of chances to save against this, and it requires concentration. As a wizard, for example, I'd probably prefer to be concentrating on haste, so I can do twice as many actions in one turn for someone, just as one example. I don't know, maybe you can convince me to put this higher, but the concentration requirement and the fact there are so many saving throws against it means at the end of the day, I don't think it's always worth going to be using a level 1 spell slot, but I can see myself using it at some points though. Next up is Thunderous Smite. This is available to paladins and bards via their magical secrets. Like the other smites, it requires you to make an attack, and if you can make multiple attacks with one turn, it uses up one of them. So you deal your normal weapon damage plus 2d6 thunder, and if they fail a strength saving throw, they'll be pushed 10 feet away and possibly knocked prone. And you can, if you want to, Divine Smite on top of that. Now it's used a bonus action, so I can't use it again in the same turn. Oh, that was not so good. I'm going to stick this in B tier. It's nice to do 2d6 extra thunder damage, and importantly, knocking them prone and knocking them back can be really useful if they're up somewhere high, or if you just want to knock them prone and give yourself advantage on melee attacks after that. Do be careful against who you cast it against. The higher the strength, the less likely this is to work. Thunder Wave. This is available to bards, druids, sorcerers, wizards, tempest domain clerics, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights. Storm sorcerers get it at level 6, and you can get a ring called the Ring of Absolute Force, which can grant you this spell. It's quite a well-known spell, I would say. It's a 17-foot square from right in front of you, deals 2d8 thunder damage, and if the enemies fail a Constitution saving throw, they get knocked back. So it is an area of effect spell. It will affect allies unless you're an evocation wizard. Let's make sure they fail. There we are, they got knocked back. They're immune to thunder damage because they're inside a silence aura. That's going to be quite rare. At lower levels, the damage is quite good for an area of effect. At higher levels, not so much. But I'm going to put it at B tier, kind of like with Thunderous Smite, because knocking enemies off ledges is just so great. And it feels so good, and it can deal a lot of damage that it's worth keeping. Lots of fights do have some verticality, so it can actually become very useful, but there are other ways to knock people back, like using arrows or shoving, although if the shove you can only do one potentially, but it still definitely has its uses. Next up is Witch Bolt. This is available to sorcerers, warlocks, wizards, arcane tricksters, eldritch knights, and blue ancestry draconic bloodline sorcerers. So what does it do? It's an attack roll. If you hit with it, it does 1d12 lightning damage. And then on subsequent turns, you can activate it to deal an additional 1d12 lightning damage, which also takes an action. It requires concentration to maintain this. Now this is lightning damage, so I have actually made Blaze Liara Portier here wet. If you upcast it, the initial damage goes up by 1d12. Let's show you level 2. So I did double the damage there, which seems pretty cool, I suppose. That was a level 2 spell slot though. So it's my next turn. I managed to maintain concentration, thankfully. So I've got this here. Activate Witch Bolt. Deals 1d12 damage. And that's my action gone. Now she's wet, so I dealt 16 damage. Wow. That's all I'm going to say to that. That's really not that much. And this is under like the best conditions I can have where they are wet. I've seen some, I mean, I guess you could make a build around it, I suppose. The initial damage, it's okay if the enemy is wet. 1d12 times 2. Okay at best. There's no addition to that. It's not like 1d12 plus your spellcasting modifier. It requires your concentration. Then in subsequent turns, it's just 1d12 damage. And as soon as you get to level 5, your cantrips start doing more damage than that. Yes, that is automatically hit, but it's your action. And it's just 1d12. As soon as that person dies, that's it. You can't like recast it on anyone else. If it wasn't for the wet condition, this would be down in D tier right now. The only reason it's not down in D tier, you can make characters deal double damage with it if you set it up using another action for wet, but that's fine because wet is applicable to many spells. But don't be fooled by this. This is a trap spell in general. That 16 lightning damage isn't really, and again, that's when she's wet. If she wasn't wet, that would have just been 8 damage. I would so much have rather done almost anything else right now. I've got so many better spells to cast than just dealing 8 or 16 damage, and just to a single target as well. And lastly, we have Wrathful Smite. Oops, I don't think it actually belongs in D tier. Can I bring it back out? I can't. Oh, I'll have to move in a second. Right, this is available to Paladins. Wrathful Smite. So you make an attack. If you hit, the enemy makes the wisdom saving throw. If they fail, they are frightened, which means they have disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls, and they can't move. Plus they take some psychic damage, which is all very nice. Let's use it here. Now they made their save. I could use my Divine Smite to finish her off. I'm not going to. That feels better. Right. Where does this go? I think this belongs in C tier. If your spell save DC is particularly high, actually, I'd probably move it up. But Paladins tend to be quite mad. Yes, I suppose we could actually give them some gauntlets, but we've only got so many items to spread out because the spell save DC is based off your charisma as a Paladin. It does require concentration, which is why I wouldn't put it any higher than B. But having an enemy frightened, especially an enemy that is a melee enemy, is really powerful because they potentially can't even hurt you. But it uses your action and bonus action, just like the other smites. But then again, we can put Divine Smite on top of it. This isn't really for the damage, the 1d6 psychic damage. It's more about inflicting frightened onto an enemy. Anyway, there we have it. Got through them all eventually. Thank you for making it this far if you have. I'm sure you will let me know if I've made any mistakes. And I haven't talked about every single combination of classes, subclasses, multi-classing, and items. Let me know which items work well with which spells. That is something you did very well in the previous video, so thank you very much. And one more time, thank you if you made it this far, and thank you to all the members of my channel, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next one.